Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Stephanie Adams and I will be the host for this TLC session, Making It Relevant, Constructivist Theory and the Use of Analogies in the Online Classroom, presented by Michael Jensen. We are excited that you have joined us today to hear Michael's presentation. The chat window will be open at the end of the session, so please feel free to participate or ask questions at that time. Please welcome Michael Jensen.
Hi guys. I'm assuming video and audio are both working, and we'll just move ahead here. First time I've done this, I feel like I'm working in the dark a little bit here. But I'm glad you're here. I'm glad to have the opportunity to make this presentation. And I just want to just kind of give an overview of kind of what we're doing here. This is kind of what we're going to cover. Talk about who our students are, retention rates of online students in particular, and then tie that to some adult learning theory, constructivism, which is an adult learning theory, and then how that ties into kind of what you know, the analogies and kind of the core of my presentation here. So note that the average age, now I teach completely online here, so I'm assuming we're all in the same boat, or at least part-time online. Average age online is over 37 years. 81% of them are employed when they enroll, and only 16% are traditional students, straight out of high school, you know, that type of student. So they are predominantly working adults, which, as all of us who've been teaching online for any length of time knows, that brings with it some unique challenges. Those challenges play out in retention rates. Full-time online students have retention rates of 55%, part-time of 39%. And when we compare that to full-time traditional students, the full-time traditional students have a 79% retention rate and part-time have a 46%, we can see that there is quite a gap there. Just over half. Now these are not unique to Ashford. These are pretty much you know, industry-wide. So those retention rates are not great. And again, if you've worked with online students before, you know why. There's 1,000 things that can go wrong in an online student's life, some of which have nothing to do with the college or with us as instructors, but they're just unique to their lives, and that there's very little we can do about. However, there are some things that we can do. And so this is in just tying to adult learning theory in general. There are 6 main characteristics of adult learners. And again, most of ours are adult learners. They're self-directed and autonomous. They utilize knowledge and life experiences. They have experience in life and they bring that to the classroom. They're goal-oriented. That's why they're back in school. If any of you who have taught large numbers of traditional students know that sometimes they're in school because that's where they're supposed to be, that's where mom and dad want them to be, or that's the logical next step. They don't want to get a job, you know, so there's many reasons. But usually when someone comes back to school, they're goal-oriented, they're here for a particular reason, and they have specific goals that they're hoping to achieve. They're relevancy-oriented, right? They want the material to be relevant. They want it, if they don't feel like it matters to their career, to their life, it's tougher for them to be excited about that material. They're practical. They expect respect in the classroom. They're older students. They expect to be treated with respect by other students, by faculty. Now, 3 of these I bolded because those are ones in particular. Now, the 6th one, with expecting respect, we can obviously do something about that in the way we treat students. Hopefully we all treat our students with respect. But as far as the material itself, you know, that utilizing knowledge and life experiences, relevancy and practical, that's what I teach. Writing classes. I teach English 122 for Ashford primarily. And so they want the material in my class to be practical, relevant, and to allow them to use their knowledge and life experiences. So when the course material doesn't appear relevant, practical, or connected to previous knowledge and life experiences, students can get frustrated. And again, this can affect retention rates. Again, my point earlier was that there are things in non-traditional students' lives that we can't do much about, but there are things that we can do about. There are ways that we can present our material, and the material that we present, we can present it in a way that makes it relevant, practical, and connected to students' lives. And that last point that I bolded there kind of ties into constructivist theory. And I know all of this that I'm going to present here is fairly, you could call it kind of lightweight. We're not delving deeply into, theoretical concepts here. This is all stuff that makes sense. And in fact, when I started to put this together, it was because I found that there were some things that seemed pretty basic, but maybe it's because they were so basic that I was forgetting to do them. And I presented a version of this presentation at 2 or 3 other conferences, and that's usually the response that I've received from people at those conferences was, it's easy to forget to do this kind of stuff because we're at a certain level, where you're a PhD or you're whatever, you know this stuff inside and out, and sometimes we forget that our students don't. And so if we do some things that seem fairly basic that we may not be doing, it can actually make a big difference for students. So again, you're probably familiar with this, but constructivism is a theory of learning that talks about how our minds create knowledge, and how we understand when we're presented with new information, how we understand that, if we understand it, and if we do, how that happens. And the idea here is that learners incorporate new ideas into their present knowledge structures. So our students know something about this, and now I present them something new, and they are far more likely to be able to integrate it and make use of it if they can work that into what they already know. All right, so if it clashes with what they know, or if it has nothing to do with what they know already, it can be difficult to now make that part of their knowledge base and work with that because it's so foreign to them. And so constructivism simply says, understand that students, when they take new information, they're going to incorporate it into what they know already. They know this thing, and now this new thing can come in, and whether it's conscious or subconsciously, they work it into what they know, if they can, to then make it work for them. So constructivist activities, there's several websites where you can look at using constructivist theory in the classroom. There are lots of activities that are designed to help learners make logical connections between what they already know and what they're being taught. And again, the idea is that the better we are at that, the more we're able to tie this new information to something they're familiar with, the better. It's easier for them to then retain that and make use of it long term, for it to become part of their core kind of knowledge structure. So these are the kinds of things that are considered constructivist classroom activities. So case studies, all right, you're presented with a situation, and now here's what they know already, here's a situation, how do you use what you know to deal with this new situation? Experiments, simulations, class debates, discussions, online discussion boards. Again, if they're done well, they're done skillfully, we'll then ask students to take what they know already and now apply this new knowledge, and how do you work it together and make it work? And so this is what I want to talk about here. And again, this appears kind of lightweight, but simplistic or simple, but it makes a difference, and sometimes we forget to do it. And that's simply to use analogies. So, and again, you're probably familiar with the concept of analogies. They're comparisons that give people a framework they can use to understand new information. So they compare one thing to another in order to, based on some shared quality, so students can so whoever is hearing the analogy can understand it better, in this case, students. So we take one item that's unfamiliar, that's the target, that's the new information that we're teaching students, and then we connect it with something that the students already know, which is the analog from whence we get analogy. And then that helps make it more understandable. It connects the material to previous knowledge and experiences. And again, all the way back to our learning theory, adult learners in particular, They want material that they can work into their previous knowledge and experiences. They have years and years of this knowledge and experiences. So even though this is almost, it's not like a case study or an experiment in that it's a direct addition to that, but it's a way to make something new understandable by comparing it to something old, something familiar. In fact, if you watch stand-up comedians at all, and I have a Netflix account, I watch, stand-up comedians all the time. And oftentimes the big laughs come when the stand-up comedian will talk about something and then they'll compare it to something that nobody had thought about before. And then there's that aha moment when the audience bursts out laughing because they realize this connection that they didn't know was there. And it's funny, it's a funny connection. I used to watch a British comedy called The Thin Blue Line. It's with Rowan Atkinson, is the guy that plays Mr. Bean. If you're familiar with him, if you're familiar with Mr. Bean, that's his most famous role. The Thin Blue Line, he plays this police commissioner guy. And at the beginning of every episode, he had a little monologue. And at the end of the monologue, every time he would have some analogy that he would draw out. And they were always funny. And the one that I remember is he's talking about youth and youth crime. And he says, what we'll find is that youth are like the last banana in the bowl, not all bad. And so, it's a little laugh, but it makes that connection. I think of youth, I think of the last banana. It's turning, but it's not terrible. And then we incorporate that, right? We learn from that sticks with us long term. And great humor does that. There's lots of fields in education or outside of education that use analogies to help the practitioners to understand. I have a quote here from Stanislaw Ulam that you can read. Right? It says, a good mathematician is one who finds analogies between things. A great mathematician is one who finds analogies between analogies. So in the science world, this idea of being able to compare something I'm working on with something that's already known helps me to understand what I'm working on better, as long as it stays within the realm of the working analogy. So as I see them, analogies are a basic form of constructivist philosophy. We connect new concepts to already known concepts. That makes the new concept easier to remember and understand. And so I want to share with you a few that I use in my classroom that it took me, and it's pathetic, it took me years to come up with these, and it shouldn't have, but it's because I wasn't thinking of it. I wasn't thinking to do this. So when I teach students about the writing process, and they always say, oh, I get writer's block and it's terrible. I teach them this idea about the artist and the judge, that we have an artist and a judge in our brain. The artist is creative and silly and playful and has tons of stuff that he or she wants to say or paint or draw. The judge is very buttoned down and conservative and doesn't like things. And the reason I tell them the reason they get writer's block is because they're trying to put these two in a room together and make them work together, and they don't work together well. So I tell my students, when you start a new writing project, let the artist play. That's every paper. Let the artist, and then they just go and brainstorm. Just be silly. And I tell them, as soon as you go, I shouldn't write that. That doesn't make sense. That's the judge poking his head in. You got to keep him out. And it's helped my students get better at or be more willing to do pre-writing and brainstorming activities and to write, because they've learned to separate those processes. Whoa. So I'm in a room with lights that turn off. Sorry. This is why I teach students that once they get beyond that brainstorming step, what they have come up with now, their list of stuff or their free writing is like concrete spinning around the back of a concrete truck. It has the potential for value, but only if it is now poured into a structure. So then we start talking about how we structure an essay: intro, body, conclusion, paragraphs, and how they form the structure into which we pour our content. Helps them understand that a lot better, because most of them are familiar with that. This is what I've just developed in the last couple of years, this idea of an essay is like a gazebo. The thesis statement's the roof, covers everything, but it has to be supported by the supporting posts, the because statements, the reasons. If those posts are weak, the roof will fall in. Supporting points are supported by the evidence. The evidence is the foundation. If it's a weak foundation, the supporting points will fall, the thesis will fall. And I tell my students now, every new essay, I say, all right, bring in a gazebo on this topic. And they know that means a thesis with some supporting points and begin looking for evidence. I'll skip this one because we don't have as much time. When I talk about writing concise essays, I talk about, I've got a big Suburban, I've got a motorcycle, the Suburban engine's a lot bigger, a lot more horsepower, but the motorcycle is faster. Why is that? Because the motorcycle has less fat, less dead weight. Most of the material on that motorcycle is actually propelling it forward, which makes it faster. Their essays should be that way. They should be lean. So we talk about filler phrases, saying things like a small sail-powered craft when I should say a sailboat. So having no words, no phrases, nothing in that essay that is not actually propelling it forward. And so these are things I can constantly refer back to, and the students can remember, oh, that's right, I don't have strong supporting posts, my thesis is going to fall, or I'm driving a Suburban instead of a motorcycle. I got a couple of these from other teachers. One example is from biology class. She told me that she compares a cell to a city. It has everything: food distribution, waste extraction, everything you'd find in a city in order for a city to, the people there to survive, is contained within an individual cell. It helps students understand that better. I really like this one as well. This is from a math classroom, a teacher trying to explain the idea that a common denominator has to be the same. And her example was, you get 3 little kids and give them each a scoop of ice cream, and if they're not exactly the same size, you watch the chaos that ensues. So that was her example there. It's like giving your kids ice cream. They've got to be exactly the same size or it's not going to work. I was sent an email from a friend years and years ago that had some of these in it, so I wanted to share some of these. These are kind of silly analogies that help us to kind of get this idea, right? So I guess I'll read these to you, right? She had a deep, throaty, genuine laugh, like that sound a dog makes just before it throws up. So you hear that, right? And you can, this is that laughter, that aha moment. John and Mary had never met. They were like 2 hummingbirds who had also never met. This is my favorite, although it's a bit crass, I guess. The ballerina rose gracefully on point and extended one slender leg behind her like a dog at a fire hydrant. He was deeply in love. When she spoke, he thought he heard bells, as if she were a garbage truck backing up. So every one of these connects something new, some image I'm trying to give you to something you already know. And whether it's funny or whether it's insightful, that's the idea. So there are 5 steps involved in making an effective analogy. One, we have to decide whether we need one or not. Not everything needs an analogy. Some things are simple enough to understand on their own that we don't have to build some complex analogy around it. So the idea is, find those things that are difficult for students to understand first, and then see if we can develop an analogy with that will help them understand it better. Then we have to brainstorm. We have to figure out if we can find something that works. What is the core component that I'm trying to teach? Like a thesis statement or a paper, what goes into an essay. And then so what is the concept that I'm trying to teach that is going to be difficult for students to understand? And what else has something similar to that? What else do I know of that I can say? And we have to be a little creative here. I mean, turning an essay into a gazebo wouldn't seem to be, but I started with, okay, so you have something you have to support. You always have to support your thesis. Well, buildings support things. You support the roof. There's lots of things we support that are outside of the essay world. And so then it starts to build itself. So we need to then find those things. Like I said, they don't just like magically happen, or students would probably make them on their own, but they come together. And then does the student understand it? For example, if I'm going to use Scooby-Doo as an analysis or as an analogy, what if my students, heaven forbid, have never seen Scooby-Doo, or have never seen whatever it is. I've never seen a gazebo, or I've never ridden a motorcycle. Again, heaven forbid. And then I have to put this thing together, and then I have to present it to the students, show it to them how it works, how the two connect. I have to then explain the limits of the analogy, because analogies are not perfect by definition, right? Analogies, they're approximations, they're things that are similar, but if I'm using the Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean example of the youth and the banana, I have to tell students, okay, so kids really aren't bananas, they're like bananas, or the same thing, with the gazebo. We may sometimes have to limit the analogy, or I will have students that then try to stretch the analogy beyond its natural limits, and it becomes frustrating and problematic. And then typically, we will wean the students off the analogy. Now, in mine, I will just, for like the gazebo, I keep that the entire semester, because always my first, depending on when, how long my class goes, how many essays there are. If I have more than one essay, as soon as I move to the new essay, I say, all right, we're starting our new essay. Here's the thing. By Monday, I want you to bring me a gazebo. Just bring me the roof and the support posts, and then we'll look at and then the next day we'll look at the evidence. And then they know exactly, and it's helped my students. I mean, I haven't done any kind of statistical survey to see this, but just from my experience of teaching for a lot of years before and after I viewed this, my students understand better what a thesis is supposed to do and write a thesis better that actually connects to their essay, which they haven't always done. And they have support points that more closely match that. So I'll always say I'll say, okay, in your essay, all right, make it a motorcycle. I don't have to do the whole thing. I say, make your essay a motorcycle. Cut out all the extra stuff. So again, like I said, this is kind of basic stuff, I realize. And at times I've thought, well, this would be a better presentation to make to new faculty. But then at times I think, and I have been told that it actually might be a better presentation to faculty who've been around a long time, because sometimes we forget these basics, to do really simple little analogies, little similes and metaphors to tie things together, because we forget that students need that. We know this stuff so well. We've been teaching it so long that no one has to explain to me how an essay is put together, or that an essay should be concise. But these are students who haven't done all this. And so sometimes I have to be overly simplistic in my approach to it, remembering that we're not on the same level. I actually took a statistics class last semester because I'm doing another master's program. And I tell you what, I needed my teacher to be really basic about stuff, because I'm an English teacher. This stuff was so far over my head. I was swimming and never catching up. But so that's it pretty much. Remember the small things. Remember that constructivist theory can come down to these little things as well. If I can take new ideas and then I can connect them to something the students know, it makes it easier for them to understand them. So we have like 8 minutes here left or so. And so we're going to open up the chat box. If you have an analogy that you like to use, like I've stolen analogies from people all the time. If you have an analogy you want to share, for heaven's sakes, share it with us. Tell us what you do, because it'll make all of us better. Or if you have any questions, feel free to post any questions you have. But especially if you've got, I'll do my best to answer them. But if you've got analogies you want to share, then, for heaven's sakes, share them, and I'll jot them down and use them in my class if I can. There's a gazebo slide. So this is the one I skipped earlier. It's my filling the bucket. Very good. Very good. So Steph, we're talking ethos there, right? Like, I, as the writer, I'm not a recognized authority on this, but if I bring in those who are recognized, I can borrow their authority to help make my case stronger, like these paid professional witnesses. Good. That's excellent. That's excellent. This one here, the bucket is, I tell the students, let's say you have a 5-page paper. You're a research scientist. You've got a 5-gallon bucket to fill up. And if you have 2 options. You can cut a really wide piece of ice that's only 1 inch thick and put it in that bucket, or you can take a piece of ice that's 1 inch round but goes all the way to the bottom of the lake. Which one's going to give you a better idea of the health of that lake? And the students all say, well, it's the narrow and the deep one. And then we talk about how to narrow topics so that we can have more depth to them rather than really broad, shallow topics. And good point here, right? No, I think that's a great idea, that you think, okay, if you were, because really that's what we're doing, right? Is we're trying to persuade people, just as like a lawyer's trying to persuade a jury. So you think, who do I put up on that stand that people will trust and believe? Who do I put in this paper? In fact, we talk about the appeal to authority, logical fallacies, about how we say, why does Michael Jordan sell Hanes underwear? And because I tell him, Michael Jordan doesn't know what fits my backside better than I do, but people tend to trust him. So when we think about moving into an academic setting, right, we say, who is trusted? Who are trusted on topics? Oh, very good. Yin and yang to explain citations and references. Very good. They, right, Sherry? I figure if I put on a pair of Hanes, I should be able to slam dunk tomorrow. Right? So that's why, I mean, that's why guys like Michael Jordan make millions and millions of dollars selling stuff they know nothing about, because people trust them, right? Now in the academic world, we have to use people that are academically trustworthy, but same concept, right? Who would academics trust talking about global warming? Al Gore or someone with a PhD in paleoclimatology? So I like the yin and yang too. I'll probably steal that one. I'm stealing all your stuff, guys, just so you know. But yeah, so these are all really good. And again, stuff that, you know, we just sometimes, it's like when I talk about transitions in class. I talk about transitions are like road signs. I know, and I talk with students, have you ever been riding with someone, you were driving, but they knew where to go and you missed a turn because they forgot you didn't know where you were going? And so it's the same thing as I say, I don't need transitions in my paper for me because I know where my paper's going. I know the starting point, I know the end point, but my reader doesn't. That's why we should go back to our paper and put up road signs. Okay, you're gonna make a left turn here, and make a U-turn here. You know, so however, on the other hand, these are our road signs along the way. So same kind of thing. It's I think for students and probably for us as well, that the most difficult thing is to remember that you, the writer, you are not the reader, and you have to create reader-centered writing and think, what does my reader know? What does my reader need? How do I present this best to my reader? Not how I would like it best, but how would my reader like it best? Know your audience. It's got to be there's got to be a good analogy for know your audience. That's a good point too, Sherry. Tried, would you sing a pop song and let others believe you made it up? Right. So talking about intellectual property versus physical property. Good. Pop song. That's in our students' lives, that's probably the best one to use. Right. Would you sing I don't even know any modern pop singers. Taylor Swift. Would you sing a Taylor Swift song and pretend it was yours? Jeez, there's my light again. Sorry. I don't move around, my light turns off. And now it's not coming back on. Well, at least you can see me by the, hang on, here we go. There we go. So it looks like we're about a minute out, but thanks guys for showing up. And like I said, I hope, like I said, this is a pretty simple thing. It's not hard. It's not deep, dark, you know, learning theory to do this, but it's things sometimes we overlook because we forget. It's so easy, we forget to do it. And it makes a world of difference. It has made a world of difference in the lives of my students. I am confident of that because they have told me that they never understood how all that worked together until I taught them the gazebo, or they always had writer's block until they learned about the artist and the judge and how to separate the two. So yeah, thank you guys very much. Yeah, thank you very much for attending. It's a kind of a fun half hour to spend in the middle of an afternoon. Thanks, Marion, Peter, Char, Sherry. Appreciate you all giving me a half hour of your time.